Way to go, Tic Tac!
That's how you punch.
Wakanda forever!
You wouldn't have heard of me.
Let me put you on hold.
Dance off, bro! He's a friend from work!
I can do this all day.
Yeah, I know.
What up, guys? It's Dom, and welcome back to another movie review. Today we are going over and ranking Shaun of the Dead. Shaun of the Dead, released in 2004, written and directed by Edgar Wright, the uneventful, aimless lives of a London electronics salesman and his layabout roommate are disrupted by the zombie apocalypse. So this movie was requested by Now This Is Epic 1919, and if you want to see me review a movie that you love, make sure to comment it down below and I will add it to the list, and then I will get to it after the previous movies that have already been requested. But either way, this movie, the reviews are outstanding on it. It has high praises, and I was really looking forward to watching it. However, I feel like it was slightly disappointing compared to the expectations I had for it. But either way, let's just get right into the 10 essential aspects of a movie. The first essential aspect is plot. So this is a zombie movie, so obviously the plot is all about the survival of the zombie apocalypse and all the terrible things that happen along the way. And overall, I think the story, even though it is a comedy, which usually, as I always say, the plot and story takes a back seat when it comes to comedy movies. However, this one is decent. I like zombie apocalypses. I like the plot that comes with those type of movies. Now, they aren't as original as obviously the ones from the past, because the first person to really make a movie about that gets all the credit for that. But overall, the plot was good. I felt myself wanting to see what would happen next with these crazy adventures that they were getting themselves into. But of course, it is a comedy, so it wasn't really thought out too hard. They kind of just did the bare minimum that they needed to have a plot somewhat enticing and try to get the comedy to really push through there. So overall, the plot wasn't anything special, but it definitely didn't tank. The second essential aspect is attraction. So this is where this movie should be doing the best because it's a comedy, so the attraction, the entertainment that you get from the movie comes from this. And sadly, this is where it was slightly disappointing. I felt the comedy wasn't as good as I was expecting it to be. There were some scenes that clearly were meant to be funny that weren't that funny. Now, I have to give it credit. There was a lot of funny parts to it. The comedy was there. It just wasn't in as many scenes and as high quality as I was hoping it was going to be. That's all. So it has some attraction there, but not too much. The third essential aspect is theme. So there was a bunch of little messages that they were trying to bring to the audience when it came to this movie. They had some about loving your parents no matter what they've done or who they are. There was some about relationships in general and trying to take someone back even though they might not deserve it because they're trying their hard. There was a lot of different messages, but no real main theme or message that they were really trying to bring onto the audience. I feel like there were just smaller scenes to kind of bring a new kind of engagement from the audience if they could. The fourth essential aspect was dialogue. So I actually thought the dialogue in the movie was more entertaining than the actual comedy. When they weren't trying to be overly funny and they were just being the characters themselves, those parts were funnier. Because the characters themselves, the situations they got in, the lives they lived, that part has some entertainment to it. That part has some attraction. It has some comedy. But the overall forced laughing and just making jokes on purpose, that part isn't too funny. So the dialogue, I have to give it credit because the actors actually knew how to portray these characters and speak in ways that would entertain the audience, but also actually sound like a realistic conversation for the most part. Some felt very forced, but for the most part, the conversations did feel real in this. And because they had that extra comedy aspect to it, it made it better. So I have to say the dialogue is something they did good with. The fifth essential aspect is acting. So there was some bad acting, some decent acting, but there was two actors in particular that kind of sold me on this movie, and that was Simon Pegg, who played Shaun. He was the main character. His character in general was the one that was on screen the most, and you wanted him to be able to succeed in the parts of the story that he was supposed to. You wanted him to get back with his girl. You wanted him to survive this apocalypse with her and get back to the love story that this movie started with. And his roommate, Nick Frost, who played Ed, was the funny guy that was just meant to add a comedic aspect to the movie, and he was the only one that really went all out and too far with the comedy, which did bother me, but otherwise the character himself, he played perfectly. So him doing well in the acting was good. I just wish he was given better pieces to the puzzle to actually make it funnier. The sixth essential aspect is cinematography. So when it came to visuals, Nothing special. I mean, they could have done a lot worse, but they also could have done a lot better. So I'm not going to really be deducting any points for that. It just kind of did as expected. When it came to emotions, though, I found myself invested in Shaun and the relationship he had throughout the whole movie. So when it came to getting me emotionally invested in that character, it did succeed. Even though it didn't have much of a story, he is just such a lovable character, and you want him to be able to get the things that he's going out to get. So that it actually somehow did a good job with. I don't know how, it just worked. But for the rest of the characters, I mean, it didn't really matter if the zombies got to them or not. I just didn't want them to get to Shaun. The seventh essential aspect is editing. So this movie's an hour and 39 minutes. Really good length for a comedy. Usually between an hour and a half, an hour 45 is right where it should be, because it doesn't have much of a story, so it needs to be able to get to the jokes and end in a timely fashion without really boring the audience. And this movie was paced well for how hectic the story it had was. It actually did flow really well. So the editing is something they also did really good. The eighth essential aspect is soundtrack. So the soundtrack isn't too memorable, but there was certain scenes that I linked directly with the music that was playing behind, like the fight scene in the bar when the zombies were coming in. That I do remember very well, and I have to give it credit for that. But otherwise, they were just songs that were playing in the background to up the theme. So only a few to pick out of for that soundtrack that was really memorable. The ninth essential aspect is directing. So I feel like it's the director's job to take these previous 8 essential aspects, put them together to make a movie that's worth watching. And the director of this movie is Edgar Wright, and he's previously directed one movie, and that is A Fistful of Fingers. And I've never personally watched it, but based off of this one, it was probably a comedy, and it was probably, again, story took a backseat, and he did what he could. Overall, I can't hate on the movie too much for not having much comedy. It tried its best. I just felt like it tried a little too hard in some points that didn't need to be really funny. There were some scenes that kind of felt useless, and the story could have actually been elevated a little more and made it an even better movie than it was. But I know that this is just supposed to be a comedy flip on Dawn of the Dead instead of Shaun of the Dead, and I get that. But either way, I just feel like the movie could have been done a little bit better, and I was really excited and hoping that it would be, but it, again, didn't meet my expectations. And the 10th essential aspect is time. So this movie definitely stood the test of time. I mean, it is now 21 years old, and I just feel like it did okay for me, but because there's so many people that have a love for this movie, because the reviews are so high, so I know that, and it has been requested to me by someone, and I've been told about the movie by others. So I know that it still definitely stands the test of time. For me personally, it's an okay movie. So for me, it wouldn't stand the test of time. But I understand why those people see it as a better movie and see that it stands the test of time. Now, onto the reviews. So, Rotten Tomatoes critics gave it a 92%, Rotten Tomatoes audience gave it a 93%, and IMDb gave it a 79%. So now, me seeing Rotten Tomatoes critics and audience both giving it above 90 is what really got me to want to see this movie. Because usually that only happens if the movie's really, really good. So that's why it was such a disappointment. Maybe if the reviews were lower and I didn't set my expectations so high up, I might even see the movie in a different light. But me personally, it does not deserve to be in the 90s. And honestly, 79 is a little too high for me. I think 70 is a pretty good range to put it. Maybe 60-something, 70s. I just think it does what it needs to do when it comes to the story. It didn't need too much, but again, since this is a comedy, it should have more comedy. It should have something that's actually funnier and not just, I don't know, it felt a little cartoony to me compared to what I was expecting it to be and how it could have been. So, and obviously comedy is an opinion, because I might think something's funny and you might not, or vice versa. So maybe the majority of the audience thinks this movie is a hoot, but for me, it wasn't all that. So I definitely think 65 to 70 range is where I would put it max. And finally, the rankings. So, in 2004, it's going to be first. It's the only movie that I have done so far in that year. So until I get more, it will stay in first. In the 2000s, it's going to be sixth, above 1408 and below The Happening. Now, it's above 1408 because even though there isn't much story, I found myself being engaged with the main characters. So I actually wanted to see what happened next. And the problem that 1408 has, it's a great movie, and the ending is really what saves it. Otherwise, it's nothing too crazy. It's just a basic horror thriller trying to scare you, trying to be really mysterious. And it was to a point, but not until the end. And the ending is really what locked in that movie for me as a really good ending. But the rest of the movie is still not perfect. So I have to say, overall, as a movie goes, Shaun of the Dead is done better, and it is more fluid and actually what I expected compared to 1408. So that's why it's slightly above it. And it's below The Happening because both have almost apocalypse plot line. And I believe that the events that happened in The Happening are way more intriguing, and the concept is just much more interesting to me. I think trying to figure out what causes all these things and why people are committing suicide and just the mass hysteria that has been caused in the world, and seeing the characters actually go through it and try to find a way to survive is a lot more interesting to me than just another zombie movie. Now that's just personally, and obviously that movie isn't a comedy, so it had to have a good plot, and it didn't need to have funny moments, but there was funny moments in it, and they felt more natural to me than the ones in Shaun of the Dead. So overall, I just think it's just a better version of the same movie with plot taking a little more of a front seat than a back seat, like in Shaun of the Dead. And in all time, it's going to be 42nd, above 1408 again, and below X-Men Apocalypse. Now, I'm not going to explain why it's above 1408 again, for the same reasons. Those movies are really close. It's barely above it, which is why it's still barely above it. And it's below X-Men Apocalypse just because the plot is way better in Apocalypse. I'm much more engaged with it. It's much more original than another zombie movie. There's a lot more character development. They took the time to make it a better movie, so it just clearly deserves a spot. I mean, I didn't really have to think about why. It just clicked, and I knew that it was better. And I don't really know what else to say about it. It just has more to offer you than Shaun of the Dead does. That's all I have for Shaun of the Dead. If you guys enjoyed this review, make sure to leave a like and subscribe, and make sure to comment what movie you want me to review next. Let me know if you thought of this movie, and let me know what I clearly missed, because I'm in the minority here. Everyone loves this movie, and I just happen to not as much. So let me know what I could have missed and what I should have looked out for, and maybe I'll watch it again, maybe put it in a new light, and maybe even re-review it. So you just let me know. And if you want to see someone that does a similar reviewing style to me, check out my best friend, Mr. Majoritarian. He's the one that got me into movie reviewing. He has a channel of his own, goes over the essential aspects, goes over the reviews, has his own rankings in place. So make sure to go check him out if you want to see something similar. And I hope you guys have an amazing night. Peace out.